Welcome to the Stray Pointers podcast, where seemingly ordinary people join us for extraordinary discussions. This episode of the Stray Pointers podcast was recorded on August 1st, 2023. I'm your host, Jim Lawless. For links to items referenced in the podcast, please see the show notes for this episode at straypointers.com. Today we have with us author, media creator, all-around 21st century Renaissance man, Eric San Juan. So Eric, thank you for being on here.
Thank you for that hyperbolic and ridiculous introduction. I appreciate it.
I thought it fitting to someone who commands the written word the way you do. Tell me, okay, so to get things out in the open, you're the author or co-author of about a dozen books.
Mm-hmm.
You've written on the web. You've got YouTube video casts. You just got your you're applying your craft in a number of different media. Can we talk a little bit about the formative years, like in your younger years? What do you think sort of shaped you for the direction that your life has gone? As far as I don't know if this is a vocation, a hobby, or a little bit of both.
I would say that it's a little bit of both. At this point, I do make my living writing, but writing and creating also is a hobby. It's sort of the way I keep myself sane, I guess. So that kind of connects to your question, about my formative years, sort of what led me down this road. And I think it really just came down to the idea of kind of keeping myself sane, keeping myself not bored, giving myself something to have a little focus. I was often restless and bored as a child, and so I sort of just threw myself into creative endeavors, whether or not I was good at them. And
such as?
Oh, I did a lot of drawing, which I've never been good at the visual arts, but I did lots and lots of drawing. I drew comics when I was young. I wrote when I was young. I liked to build things. I was one of those kids who didn't as much enjoy the action figures and play sets as much as I liked like building toys, like the Erector sets and Ticker toys and Lego and that sort of stuff. I liked anything where I could after playtime sit back and go, hey, I made that. That was kind of my thing.
So there's been this creative energy since you were a kid that just sort of needed to get out.
Yeah, definitely so.
Okay, so talk to me then, as you were a young adult in high school. Were you in creative writing classes? Did you participate in any sort of writing competitions?
I didn't. I was a very unfocused high school student, not a very good student, if I'm being frank. I did write. That was probably one of the only things that I did pay attention to in school was opportunities to write. So when it came time to do either creative writing or essays in English class, that was usually some of the only assignments I even bothered to do. But yet by that time and during that period of my life, I don't think I had found the necessary focus needed to actually see creative projects through to fruition, which I think is something that a lot of people with the creative urge experience. Right? You want to make something, but how do you do it and actually see it through? And that's something I don't think I was able to fully wrap my head around until I was well into my 20s.
So were you an avid reader at this time?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, I was one of these, a book to 2 to 3 books a week kind of kids. I used to, in high school, I would, rather than go to lunch in the cafeteria, I would go to the library and just read in the library.
Is that right?
Yeah, I was, in fact, one of my friends that I'm still connected with from high school, that's how we met, because he used to do the same thing. And we just sort of always saw one another in the library. And I guess we both had the similar sort of, who is this dork who isn't in lunch? Kind of thing. And we became friends, and we've been friends ever since. I read constantly throughout throughout high school and early adulthood.
So when did writing then take off for you? When did it become something that you had the focus to start, finish, and see these things through?
Not until I went into a vocation where it was necessary. Um, After bouncing around through a number of jobs in my my early adulthood, I was working in finance for a little while, and I realized that I didn't like numbers, but I did like words. So I got a job just doing sort of administrative assistant work at a small newspaper chain in my region. And I did so specifically with the thought of, well, at least if I'm there and in that environment, I might be able to see an opportunity and seize upon it and possibly have the um, be invited to write some articles or something. And that was kind of my journey. That's exactly what I did. And once I had the opportunity to do some writing, that was when I kind of realized, oh, this isn't, kind of when I was daydreaming of the idea of writing, where you could just write when you were inspired and then walk away from it. That was when I realized that that isn't really the route towards being productive or being professional or both. Realizing you had to learn kind of how to just knuckle down and do it even when you weren't feeling it.
So let's continue the chronology here. Okay. So Eric, much like your friend that you met in the library, you and I know each other. Full disclosure here. We've met on a comic book and pop culture series of bulletin boards and things out on the web. We just happen to frequent some of the same. The first writing that I think I was aware of yours were some movie reviews for a site called DVD in Your Pants.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, DVD in my pants. That was
DVD in My Pants.
yes, that would have been circa the mid aughts, the early to
Okay.
mid aughts. I want to say we launched in '04 or so, roughly around there. Um,
So when you say we launched, were you part of a creative venture then, or were you the hired help, or how did that what describe that for me?
yeah, the I knew the the founder of the site, similar to the way you and I know one another. We had kind of connected um, on a website devoted to film and DVD and so on. But this was during a time when I had really gotten very passionate about film and cinema, especially classic movies and so on. And come to find out that he lived nearby. He was not very distant from me. He had an idea about um, creating his own competing site, but one that was a little more offbeat, a little more humorous, but which still came towards the idea of analyzing and reviewing film with intelligence. So I don't know how or why he thought of me, but we connected, and he wanted me to come on board to be one of his first guys. And of course, I was happy to do it. I think one of the anyone who is able to write for a living, as anyone who's lucky enough to do that will tell you, um, if you have a chance to write about something that you enjoy or that you're passionate about, that is a huge bonus, often even better than getting paid. I mean, I'm sure probably with your background in coding, there's a huge difference between doing that kind of work just to earn your living and doing it for a project that you really feel great about.
Sure, sure.
Um, and so that was it. He pitched the idea to me, and it was of course a volunteer thing. Back in those days, there was no such thing as making money on the web. Um,
So
and
so then in pretty short order, you had your own website, your own blog, that sort of thing. How did your acclamation of web technologies and writing HTML and that sort of thing, how did that come about? Was that about this time?
yeah. Oh well, no. It wasn't. I first I first started to dabble in HTML in the late '90s when GeoCities was a thing.
Okay.
I had launched a couple of fan sites for a couple of smaller bands that I really loved, that I felt like weren't getting the attention they deserved online. GeoCities was free, and I said, okay, I think I can do this. I don't recall if they had what you see is what you get. Site builders already in place or not, but I do remember getting some books on HTML and learning just so that I could do a better job. I think I remember the challenge that I had was I wanted a pretty looking menu with clickable buttons, um, and at the time that was something where I guess boy, and you could probably jog my memory. You had to take the image and you were sort of mapping the image
Oh
where you
yeah.
map sections of it to
Yep.
make, yeah. So that was what I wanted to teach myself. So that, yeah, there was around that time when I first started to dabble into that sort of the tech side of getting your creative work online. And then of course it continued with DVD My Pants and some other projects afterwards.
Sure. Very interesting. Okay. So can we shift gears here and now let's talk about your published books. How did you go from writing on the web and uh, working at a job to co-authoring or authoring some books and in some cases publishing them on your own?
Um, it really just came down to, for at DVD My Pants, a collaborator and I, Jim McDevitt, now an old friend of mine, we had an idea to do a series on the works of Alfred Hitchcock. And when I pitched him the idea for this series, I said, look, we can do this as a weekly series, but I think what we're actually doing is we're writing a book. And we're just kind of gonna sort of pre-publish the first drafts online as sort of a test case to see if there's interest there. And then we can use that to get us, get ourselves a publisher, hopefully get the interest of a publisher. And that did end up working. I don't recall how long the online version of it, the weekly series ran, but we did in fact use that. And this was still early enough so that I don't think a lot of people were doing that kind of long form work online. So we used that to get the attention of Scarecrow Press, which is a subsidiary of Rowman and Littlefield. They liked what we were doing. They liked our proposal and signed us to do a book contract. So that was my first book, and kind of the same as with anything. Once you land one professional project, you just kind of use that to get the next and to get the next and to get the next, and that was kind of how I approached it. I would say, okay, I was able to do this project, so why don't you consider me for this new one that I'm thinking of.
Sure. So I've taken a stab at trying to categorize the books that you've either co-authored or authored here. So let's start with the filmmakers. You've co-authored two books on Hitchcock
Mhm.
with Jim McDevitt. You have A Year of Hitchcock, 52 Weeks with the Master of Suspense, and then you have a book called Hitchcock's Villains, Murderers, Maniacs, and Mother Issues, also
That's
with
right.
Jim McDevitt. And then you've got I think you're the sole author on these next two books. You've got Akira Kurosawa, Viewer's Guide, and the films of Martin Scorsese, Gangsters, Greed, and Guilt.
That's right.
So do you have any other filmmakers' books that I've missed here?
I don't. Yeah. With once the Scorsese book came out, which I guess it's about 2 years ago or so, now at this point, that was kind of the third and final one that I really wanted to do. After we did Hitchcock, um, I knew that Jim didn't have a great interest in Kurosawa, but I wanted to do Kurosawa next. I kind of felt like um, he hadn't gotten a treatment that was written for just regular everyday viewers. While I appreciate the scholarship that's out there on Kurosawa's work, I find it um, I find it a little too lofty for its own good, I guess is maybe a way to put it. It's aimed at a demographic that I don't think necessarily needs those books. Whereas mainstream film fans can and do love Kurosawa's work, but there's not anything out there to help them sink further into it. So that's why I wanted to tackle Kurosawa. And then after Kurosawa, the only other guy I had in mind, because these are my big three directors, I really wanted to do a similar work on Scorsese. So yeah, and then once
Okay.
I did those three, yeah, that was it. And I doubt I'll do another filmmaker book.
So in addition to everything we've talked about so far, you're a film buff as well.
Um, yeah, I suppose you could say that. I suppose you could say that. I don't tend to categorize myself that way. I know a lot of people who for them film and movies is a much bigger part of their day-to-day life than it is for me. I think I think I'm more drawn to these auteurs, these very singular creators than I am movies as a whole. Um, if that makes
Drawn, drawn in just casual viewings of these as you were growing up, or
Oh
did you
yeah,
did you have to seek them out and binge on Kurosawa?
yeah, I was drawn in by more casual viewings with all these guys. I grew up with Hitchcock movies in my household, several Scorsese movies growing up. I mean, Goodfellas. I probably watched that movie 60 times by the time I was you know by the time I was 19. Um, Kurosawa I had discovered in the early 2000s, as I was on that sort of journey into DVD in my pants, and he instantly jumped up the ladder for me. But yeah, for them, I guess again, my kind of the draw for me was the idea of like these are individuals, these people, these are creators with a vision, and I liked the idea of getting into how they made brought those that vision to life. So to go back to your question, I don't know that I consider myself as much a film buff as I am somebody who is fascinated by the creative process and how great works are made.
Okay, fair enough. You spoke of Goodfellas, so that's going to take me into another categorization that I have here. You have a couple of books on Lakehurst,
Yes,
and so these are historical about an area of New Jersey.
that's right. Lakehurst is the town where I grew up. I spent several of my formative years there, and like many of us, as an adolescent, you don't really appreciate where you live. And it wasn't until I left town that I looked back and realized what an interesting place it was, the interesting history that's there. Of course, everyone knows about the Hindenburg disaster, but there was a lot more to the town than that. So after I had left and I went, into adulthood, I entered the news business. And so I was working as a journalist in the area. Um, and Lakehurst was within our coverage area. And I kind of abused my position as the news editor of our organization to say, you know what, I'm going to do a series on the history of Lakehurst, and it was a story that grew in the telling. And I quickly realized, hey, you know what, I have a book here. This isn't just a series of articles. This is going to be a book. So once it grew large enough, I decided, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and I that came around during the early days of self-publishing when self-publishing first kind of became more viable. I think prior to that there was this whole industry called vanity presses,
Yeah.
where you would pay a lot of money to have a book put out. But self-publishing started to come about through Amazon and services like Lulu and others, where you could have the print on demand services. So when I was working on the Lakehurst project, I said, you know what, this is a good opportunity to experiment and to sort of get a feel for what that process is like, and see what it might be to put one of these, put something out on my own. So that's how the first Lakehurst book came about. Was I was doing it for the news organization that I worked for. I turned it into a book and decided, hey, let's see if I can put a book out on my own. And then
Okay.
the second one was for Arcadia Press, I'm sorry, Arcadia Publishing, which a lot of people will probably recognize, if not by name, then by the look, because most bookstores, in your local section, you have those sort of yellowish sepia tone photo books, and they're everywhere across the whole country.
Yes.
That's the publisher.
Yeah. So I see. I hadn't known that you had written that second book, and when I was doing my background checks on you here, I saw that, and it looks similar to books that are written about my hometown. So
Yes.
I had to look and make sure that you weren't, a co-author or something like that. So that one completely escaped my radar. I don't know how I missed the fact that you had written that one as well.
That one, well, that one was pretty recent. That was, I think I actually wrote that at the same time, co-wrote that one with a excellent young man and local historian named Cedric. I wrote that at the same time I was doing the Scorsese book, um,
Okay.
which, boy, that burned me out doing two projects at once.
I'll bet. I'll bet. So you've got another, I got another category here that I think is kind of interesting. I wasn't quite sure how to categorize it other than calling it pop culture or perhaps geek culture. You've got three books, Geek Wisdom, The Sacred Teachings of Nerd Culture, then Stuff Every Husband Should Know, and Stuff Every Groom Should Know. And these are in a Stuff You Should Know series, and I don't know if that's your series or not. Stuff Every Groom Should Know says it's book 14. So
Yeah,
I
that is a part of a line by Quirk Books out of Philadelphia,
gotcha.
and I was asked to come on board to be one of the contributing authors on Geek Wisdom, which is, sort of a geek focused pop culture book, sort of ruminating on famous quotes from geek culture, from comic books and films and novels and so on. And was also done by Quirk Books. People would probably know Quirk Books from Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. They're the publishers of that one.
Gotcha.
So after doing my part on Geek Wisdom, I guess the editor that I work with and the publisher there, I guess you'd have to ask them. I don't know if they like the experience of working with me or like the work or whatever. Whatever the case is, and I'm very thankful for it. They asked me to do Stuff Every Husband Should Know, and when that book did very, very well, they came back and said, "Hey, would you like to do one on Stuff Every Groom Should Know as well?" So those are all actually their concepts that
Oh, okay.
I didn't pitch those books. They came to me and sort of asked me to write them and said, "Would you like to do these?" And I said, "All right, that sounds interesting. Sure." Um, um, yeah, and that's part of a much larger. The two of them are part of a much larger line from Quark, who they've done, Stuff Every Man Should Know and Stuff Every Daughter Should Know, and lots of, there's many of them in that line at this point.
So the Geek Wisdom book, what was the genesis of that book?
Steven Siegel, the editor of the book and one of the contributing authors, um, he was with Quirk Books at the time. He conceived of the idea. We had known one another online. I did some work for him. He was an editor with Weird Tales magazine, which is where the birthplace of Conan the Barbarian and H.P. Lovecraft wrote for them and so on. So I had done some writing for Quirk book for Weird Tales. I think I did an online. I think I did a web series, a retrospective on Neil Gaiman's Sandman for them, and I wrote a piece on sleep paralysis called Whispers of the Old Hag. And again, I guess Stephen appreciated my work and the experience of working with me. So when he came up with the Geek Wisdom concept, he reached out and asked if I'd like to be one of the contributing authors, and of course I said yes. I wasn't going to say no to that.
Sure.
That was one of the most fun projects I've worked on.
Great. Um, the last segment that I would categorize your books in here is one that I think is particularly interesting. It centers around a number of different popular TV shows, or at the time, popular TV shows. Celebrating Mad Men, your unofficial guide to what makes the show and its characters tick. Then it looks like you've excerpted a portion of that book into a novelette called The Women of Mad Men, a mini ebook rather, taken from Celebrating Mad Men. Then Dissecting the Walking Dead, slicing into the guts of today's hottest show, and breaking down Breaking Bad, unpeeling the layers of television's greatest drama. So were these simply labors of love that needed to come out? How did these come about?
You got it exactly right. The first one was Breaking Bad, and that's exactly what it was. It was really just a labor of love. I had done I had self-published the Lakehurst book fairly recently before that. I think about 2 years prior to that book, I had self-published the Lakehurst book, and I was still kind of fascinated with the idea of the potential of self-publishing. I had this burning passion for Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad was coming towards its end, and I had already done a lot of online writing on Breaking Bad, often just within the context of discussions and discussion forums. Um, but I kind of felt like maybe there might be something there that I could draw from and turn into something. And with the end of the series coming up, I had this ridiculous notion of like, hey, maybe I can whip together a book and have it out in time for the end of the show. Um, where literally I had something out there within a week of the show finishing. So I just sort of set myself to that task. I don't recall how long it took me, but it wasn't that long. And if I'm being frank, I think it shows. Though the book did very well, it's not my finest moment as a writer. Though happily, I still get good feedback on it to this day. But yeah, it was a combination of just my absolute love for the show, my desire to really kind of dig in for my own benefit, to dig in and to better understand these characters and who they were and what made them tick, and what made them so interesting, and to see if I could successfully toy with this whole self-publishing revolution that was just beginning to erupt at the time. And so I got that book out. I think I want to say just within a week or so of the show ending, it ended up doing very well, like surprisingly well, as far as like sales and reception and all that. And that's what sparked me to do the next two books. Right around that time, I had quit working full time and decided to try my hand at becoming at just working freelance. And they were sort of part of that plan. I said, okay, if this Breaking Bad book did well, if I could continue to produce work like that about things that I genuinely love, that I'm genuinely passionate about, perhaps this could be sort of part of my living, part of my income. So I did, though Walking Dead wasn't finished yet, I did the Walking Dead one, and then the Mad Men one. I was again really passionate about that one. I still feel great about that book. I'm really proud of that work. I wish it had done a little better, but yeah, it was just labors of love. Like, it was something I needed to get out of my system, especially that Mad Men book. I just needed to get that out.
Okay, so I know that you're also a musician. You like to play the guitar, record, sing, do all sorts of things there. So when you're not writing, reading, playing music, you've been an avid D&D player. Is that correct? You used to play Dungeons and Dragons?
Yes, yeah, that's right. I played a lot on and off over the years for long. Like I played a lot in the '80s, and then again in the early 2000s, and then for about the last 3 years or so, we've had a campaign going.
And now you have created your own board game.
Yeah, I have two in the works. One a board game, and one I guess you can call it a card game, a cards and dice game. But yeah, they're in the works. I hope to have them both out before the end of the year. And yeah, I'd always just kind of dabbled in game design here and there. Just sort of for fun, not anything that I was ever taking seriously. When I was young, I had designed a baseball simulation game. Um, so a friend of mine had, I think it was Stratomatic baseball,
Mhm.
and I just didn't care for it. I said, no, I think I can make something better. And so I created a game, and my friends really liked it, and we ended up playing it for like 4 or 5 years in a row. Every year, I would have to manually handwrite all the cards for all the players, because I had this system for how the game cards worked and all that. So I'd done that, and I'd made some board games again just for fun. But then more recently, I had two game ideas that sort of popped into my head in the middle of the night, and I started, as I usually do, sat down and I made notes and got a spreadsheet together and started getting all my notes together. And for the first time in all my years of just sort of messing around with this stuff as a hobby, both of these ideas struck me as like, oh, wait a minute, I think these actually might be good ones that other people would play. And so I just decided, you know what, I that is one creative endeavor that I've never actually done and saw through in a sort of a public way, like putting it out there. So I said, you know what, I've tried a bunch of other stuff. Let me try the game thing. So yeah, I hope to have them done soon.
So, what does your family think about, all of this stuff that you do? Do they think that you're not the average husband and father? Do they just, take it granted? Do they understand that you're not like the average bear?
I don't know that I would frame things that way. I think there's probably a lot of people who do similar things as I do, who like to just pursue a bunch of hobbies just for the fun of it. I just happen to have been blessed to have the opportunity to get some of the stuff out there as opposed to just kind of doing it behind closed doors. That said, to answer your question, I don't really know. I think just because they've just lived with it for so long, they just kind of take it as a matter of course. Yeah, it's just like, oh, Eric's bored. He's doing, whatever whatever his thing is. I like to think that my son has um, taken it as inspiration. He's creative as well. He likes to make things as well. He's into kind of that thing. Not through any nudging on my part. He just kind of does the same. So, what he actually thinks, I don't know, and I've never asked, and I don't press him on that. Um, yes,
You've
but
you've never had heard whispers at parent teacher conferences. Oh, there goes Mr. San Juan. He's a writer.
well, I mean, I've been invited to the to speak at there's like speak at his school and my old school and stuff like that, and at my wife is a teacher, so I've spoken at her school, that kind of thing. I know. I mean, I certainly know that they're both proud. I know, my wife has always been very supportive. Like when I had my first piece of fiction published years back, I was kind of overtaken with emotion. It was a very big deal for me.
Mhm.
I differentiate between having fiction published and nonfiction published, and so when my first real piece of fiction was published, I was kind of overtaken, and she, I think she got it. She recognized how important it was to me and how much it meant to me, and she, God bless her, she's very patient with just the idea that I get sort of lost in these creative projects sometimes, which are often incredibly messy. I like to paint in my spare time sometimes, so I'll drag I'll drag all the paint down and canvas and brushes, and I'll set up at the kitchen table, which is a terrible place to paint, by the way, because you end up painting the kitchen table. I end up painting the kitchen table, which I've made terrible messes, and um, you know, to her credit, she's just very understanding. I think she just gets that it's necessary for me, and it genuinely is necessary for me. If I don't, um, if I go too long without having just made something, I get very antsy. I get, um, yeah, I get agitated. It's like I have to get. There's just something I just always need to be getting something out.
So on the flip side of that, you immerse yourself into a lot of this work. How do you deal with burnout?
By switching between things a lot, I think, um, because burnout is definitely a real thing. I mean, I've experienced it with writing quite a bit. I've often said to other writer friends who, let's say they have a day job, but they pursue writing as a passion on the side, as you do, um, as you've done a lot of writing. You're a published writer yourself. You've done a lot of online writing and blogging, um, and but you do this as sort of as something that you're passionate about on the side. And I have some friends who have done the same, but they kind of they have this notion that, well, I'd like to make it my living. And for me, I have very mixed feelings about the fact that I've been able to make that transition, because though I'm very blessed to be able to make at least part of my living through writing, it's also sapped a lot of the joy from me. It's no longer a creative outlet for me, or at least it's no longer the creative outlet that it used to be, because it's work. I have to do some amount of writing each day. So I'm no longer escaping from my workday in writing because my workday often is writing. So, I mean, I guess to get back to your question, escaping burnout has to do a lot, I think, with just jumping between hobbies and jumping between creative projects. I'll be totally immersed in music for weeks or a couple of months, and then I'll switch over to um, doing model terrain, building model terrain or something, or painting, or making board games, or designing Dungeons and Dragons campaigns, or whatever the case, whatever the case may be. I'll sort of switch between all this stuff. Once I've had my fill here, then I move over there, and then I move over there. So that's kind of been my pattern for basically my whole adult life. I'll be really into something to the point of it distracting me from everything else in life for 3, 4, 6 months, and then I'll shelve it and I won't go back to it for another year or two. But then I will eventually get back to it, and when I do, it's as if I never left.
So you touched upon my work, and I'll tell you that one of the things that influenced trying to pursue this as a a hobby endeavor, podcasting, that is the role of AI in writing,
Mm-hmm.
and what's currently happening in the writing markets as they are trying to determine if their submissions are generated by an AI or if they're written by a human. And there are a number of markets that appear to be closing, or the process of getting through. If you're not already established with a particular publisher, it's kind of a difficult thing. That coupled with just some of the search engine's inability to really index some of my blog posts that I thought should have been, that
Mm-hmm.
in past years when I had moved them around, they had better, they had better search engine optimization than they do now. Writing all that just became sort of frustrating for me because I there's a segment where I don't know that I can write for anymore, and then there's a segment where where I can write where I want, but I don't think anybody's reading it. So that's what sort of led me here. Do you think AI is going to have, or has it had, any impact on your writing endeavors?
It already has. It just in the last few months, I lost a major client and a major writing gig, a major regular writing gig to AI. They basically moved their writing operations internally with just a few editors who are now just generating AI content and editing it, and they got rid of their entire writing staff, and this made up a good chunk of my writing work for the last couple of years. So yeah, it certainly had an impact there, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, and won't be. I mean, I think this is going to continue to be something that impacts the writing field, both in the way that I just described and in the way that you described as well. Um, I can only imagine the frustration of producing this well reasoned and researched and thought out work, and then just having it sent out to the ether, and just you know Google is not yet able to differentiate between that and just words spit out by a computer. um,
Yep. Yeah, I don't know if it's that so much. It's just some it, it's I have no scientific evidence behind this, but some other folks have said basically blogs are basically persona non grata as far as some of these search engines are concerned. Some of them have all of my stuff indexed. Unfortunately, they don't seem to be the most popular, you know, sources of searches from some of the folks.
that makes sense. Have you considered eventually compiling this material into a book or books?
I did.
Um,
Yeah,
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, I did that once because it occurred to me that I had a tech blog that I started in 2010, and at some point I got along and I had amassed about 100 posts on this blog, and I thought to myself, my mom is never going to see this.
Hmm.
So
Right.
the logical thing there, and I one of the reasons I started the blog was I've I've wanted to write a book, but I don't have that focus. I get the energy together and I'll start writing, and then I want to veer off. So I thought that if I could do it piecemeal by a series of blog posts and then sort of rearrange them as they fit into a more cohesive text, that's what I do. So I did, through lulu.com, publish a book just for my mom called The Best of My Blog,
Oh,
which
that's fantastic.
if you take the word the and then best of my blog, it's the bomb. So I just put this together very simply and added a forward to it and some things like that. And I printed two copies, one for myself and one for my mom. And I have sold somebody out there actually. Somebody else bought a printed copy of this. I don't know who it was.
That's
That
that's
there's a PDF copy as well. And I finally took it off lulu.com because it just wasn't worth keeping out there. And I still have the PDF copy. And mom did read it, didn't understand a word, but she did cut into it a little bit.
well, as somebody who has read a lot of your writing over the years, I even when you are talking about things that are way over my head as far as tech is concerned, you have a very narrative approach to talking about these things in a way that kind of I find myself I'm still reading even when I'm kind of lost on the subject matter. I still find myself moving forward. So I can completely believe that your mom finished the work
Well, I
even when
don't
you know what she was reading.
I don't know that she finished it, and she didn't comprehend it. She always thought that I had, in my first job that I went to run some big giant TV for a bunch of executives. That's she just not was from she wasn't from a generation where computers were a thing. I thank you for hearing that about my writing. I came of age when I read most about computers when the home computer market was kind of in its, primordial stage. So that's the way most everything was written. So that's what I was absorbing. And I think that style I'm just aping that subconsciously when I do my writing.
Maybe that's why it feels comforting to me. I had a brief dalliance, as you and I have talked about offline or off podcast time. And I had a brief dalliance with being deeply interested in the emergence of home computing tech in the
Mhm.
80s. I had the Commodore VIC-20 where I learned BASIC and was trying to make games on it, and the Commodore 64, of course. And at the time, I don't recall specifically what magazines it was that I was reading. You would probably know better than I, but yeah, even as I was fairly young at the time, yeah, there was it felt approachable in a way that
They're not today.
yes, yeah,
Yep.
very much so. So yeah, and I see that in your work, which is something that I've appreciated. I do want to point out, especially for anyone who might be listening, the project that you did putting together your work for Lulu, and it sounds like this is really something that you did for your own personal satisfaction and for
Mhm.
your family. That's a really underrated way to use services like that. I've done something similar with a lot of my fiction where I put together, I have just like this little set of 5 books that I just gave just like some family and stuff like that with a lot of fiction and a couple unpublished novels that that I had written. And so when I wanted family to have it, it's sort of like, here, this is for me. It's never going to actually be published or go anywhere, but this is just something to have, and for myself, so that I can look on the shelf and say, okay, that's work that I did. um, and you can publish that stuff privately, and it's very, very affordable. And yeah, anybody who, let's say, like if somebody has had a blog for a long time, I urge people, bring all that stuff together, get it into a document, have it printed out for yourself. It's just a very satisfying thing.
Yep. Yep. I will tell you that if you go and search on, the best of my blog with me as the author on Amazon, you'll find people selling copies of it at $30 a pop. That
Really.
that I know there aren't that many printed copies of it out there. So these guys are stealing my work. So I've made it. I've got I've got pirates stealing my stuff. So
that is the ultimate validation.
that's right. So I probably shouldn't have made it available as a PDF that they could just print and bind and sell on demand. But if they're selling it, all the better. Maybe somebody's enjoying it. Somebody else is enjoying it out there.
That's right. It means somebody's reading it. That's the attitude I have.
Yeah.
Um,
So Eric, what worlds are left for you to conquer?
oh boy, that's a great question. I don't know. Well, I mean, hopefully I'll be able to get these board games out. And whether or not they do well or anyone even sees them isn't as much my concern as just seeing it through to completion, because since it's not something that I've done before. Um, my collaborator on YouTube, Tig Carson, and I are in the midst of conceiving. We don't really have a name for it yet. Maybe Wild New Jersey or something like that. But kind of a travelogue tour, interesting places in New Jersey video series that we're kind of in the conceptual stages of right now, that we hope to launch possibly this winter. So we'll see about maybe that, and then otherwise, yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. Oh yeah, yeah. You know what? This is it. This is very obnoxious, but it's something that I've always wanted to do, and I am going to do it one day. Is an art installation that combines, the visual arts, painting, and so on, with music and a whole walkthrough experience. I actually have it all conceived in my head. I've wanted to do it for years, and one of these days, despite it being very much going up my own rear end, I want to do it, as obnoxious as it is. I just kind of want to do it because it seems like it would be fun, and obnoxious in a fun way. I make fun of the idea because I don't want people to get the idea that I have that high an opinion of sort of my artistic works and all that. I just think it would be kind of fun to attempt to put something together like that. So yeah,
Very good.
that is something that I want to do. Oh, and to do a final comic anthology. I'd self-published a couple of comic anthologies many years back. Got partway through a third volume and just never saw it through to completion. And that one's actually kind of been gnawing at my gut for years now, because there's some really good work that nobody has seen, with some really good artists, including some that
Yes. Some we're gonna have on the podcast here soon.
Oh, that's right. I think you're going to be talking to the great Rick Lundin.
I will be, yeah.
Yes, Rick Lundin and I have an excellent story that nobody outside of you and a few others has seen. There's also another one with the great Robert Clayton Cook, who is now an artist doing commissions. I think you can find him on Facebook. I lost kind of track of him for a little bit. But yeah, there's some stuff that's just been kind of sitting in the archives, and I really need to kick myself in the butt and see that one through completion, because as somebody who tackles a lot of projects, leaving one unfinished just kind of eats at you.
Yes. Yep. Well, Eric, thank you for your time today. Thank you for being my inaugural guest. So this is episode 1 of what I hope will be more than just a few episodes here. So we'll see where this goes.
I am incredibly honored that you asked. Genuinely honored that you asked. It's flattering, and it's also fantastic to get in on the on the ground floor, because I'm really excited to see where you take this. I think you're off to a fantastic start, and you being the storyteller that you are, I have a feeling that you're going to drag some great stories out of people.
That's good to hear. I hope to. And we'll probably have to have you back, because I imagine by the next time we do, I'll have another hour's worth of material here, or you'll have another hour's worth of material here for everyone to listen to.
I hope so.
So thanks for being here. For our listeners, both of you, this has been fun. Let's do this again soon. Take care.